Okay.
So, hello everybody. My name is Morgan Healy. I am a PhD student at the University of Cambridge in the Faculty of Education and doing research that crosses between education and public health. Um, and my focus specifically is on evaluating large-scale public health programs that are targeted towards young children and improving their overall development and life trajectory. I'm here today with Zara Qaiser, and she has graciously decided and offered to have a conversation with us. So Zara, could you please introduce yourself?
Thank you so much, Morgan, for having me today. So my name is Zara Qaiser, and I'm from Pakistan. I have a bachelor's in economics from the University of London, and I did my MPhil in Development Studies from the University of Cambridge. And I have about 4 years of experience of working in the international development sector here in Pakistan, where I've mostly worked on projects related to education, economic empowerment, social protection, as well as a bit of work on digital economy. And I'm currently working as the Youth Economic Empowerment Officer as part of the Youth Empowerment Program at UNDP Pakistan. So yeah.
Amazing. Your work is so interesting because it seems to be very cross-sectoral. So I'll definitely have some questions about that, and I'm sure people will be interested to hear and learn a lot about your work experience. So the first general question I was going to ask is about your role at UNDP, but I think we can just sort of jump straight into whether, because a lot of times I think people will they'll do their master's, they'll do their PhD, and they'll sort of envision what their ideal work environment will be like, or they'll envision that their work at their job will really sort of perfectly align with the work that they did in their educational studies. And oftentimes that is the case, and oftentimes that is not the case. So I'm wondering, is the work that you're doing with UNDP and with this youth empowerment program, is it as you expected it to be? And what has surprised you about working with the UN, or something that you didn't expect in working for the UN?
Okay. Really interesting question. So I'll just, give you some background about what my current role is. So basically, like I said, I'm Youth Economic Empowerment Officer as part of the Youth Empowerment Program. And the Youth Empowerment Program basically works on, the advancement of youth in Pakistan, in terms of constructive engagement, education, as well as economic empowerment. So I particularly focus on the economic empowerment of this youth across Pakistan, which includes initiatives on employment as well as entrepreneurship. And my role basically involves program management, research and some policy work, as well as partnership development. So it's a great mix of these three kind of functions. Your question about whether it was what I had expected it to be. So because I did have some experience prior to joining UNDP, so I had some understanding about how the development sector works, and the kind of work that's involved, particularly in Pakistan. I had previously worked at a private sector organization where we would bid for projects from organizations like UNDP and the World Bank. So at that time I was in a different position, but then after I joined UNDP, we were not, because UNDP also bids for projects. They seek funding from different donors and different governments, but at the same time they also give out funds to private sector organizations to kind of implement their projects. So while in my previous work we were only bidding for projects and then implementing those, over here at UNDP we kind of act like a middleman, where we do seek funding. At the same time we take on board private sector organizations to implement these projects. So that was a bit that was a bit of a change, from where I started and what I'm currently doing right now. So in terms of the work that I do, I mean, I did expect it to be a great place to work at, and it is a great place to work at. Great colleagues, and you get to do really great work that really brings about some positive change in people's lives. But at the same time, there are some things that I really hadn't expected. I didn't, because I wasn't too familiar. I hadn't worked here obviously before, so I wasn't really aware of how things work exactly.
Can you give an example of one of those things?
Exactly, yeah. So I learned that a lot of the work that you do on a daily basis, it can be quite clerical and administrative, and that sometimes one might find boring, especially when you keep doing it over and over again, every day. So I mean, I didn't quite realize how much of it I would have to do on a daily basis. Also, as an organization, the UN, I'm sure everyone knows the UN is quite bureaucratic because of the system that it has in place, which can be good and bad at the same time. Good because there's a system in place and there's a set way of doing things. It helps you stay organized. You know what to expect. You know how to go about things. But it can also be bad sometimes because it causes a lot of delays. It can get a bit frustrating when sometimes the rules and systems keep changing. But at the same time, I do realize that this is all a part of the work that you have to do. And it's also important, the administrative part, and it kinds of bring a balance to the other kind of work, to the other kind of work that's more intellectually stimulating. So sometimes you do want work that doesn't require you to think too much all the time.
Yeah.
But it's a balance that you kind of have to bring. Also, I also working over here for about 3 years now. I kind of realized how important it is to be innovative in your work or creative in your work, because development challenges today, they're becoming more and more complex. You have COVID-19, you have climate change. These are all global problems that they impact every individual locally. And then you have new technologies that that kind of accelerate the pace of change. And development programming, it can no longer be business as usual. So we kind of, I mean, these crises today, they're all multidisciplinary in nature, right? And they have different impacts, and we need to take on development from a new perspective. And you kind of come up with programming that achieves systemic, transformation rather than just change through, a particular project, immediate change. It has to be more, widespread. So in order to kind of, address that, we need to come up with more innovative solutions, innovative ways of working and bringing about change. So that's something that I find really interesting. And I didn't quite think about it before joining UNTP, but I'm glad to have had the opportunity to be able to come up with innovative solutions and kind of implement that in our work. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really important and interesting point that you make. I mean, there's so much there's so much that I want to ask, but I think the administrative sort of bureaucratic point that you make definitely resonates. And I'm wondering if you could give an example of sort of what that looks like in practice. And then as a follow-up to that, I'd be really interested to hear as well an example of sort of innovative approaches you've taken to the work that you're doing, and I'll ask a follow-up question after that. So first, sort of, what does the bureaucratic nature actually look like in practice, and an example of that?
Okay. So something really, really basic. For example, if UNDP wants to kind of hire a firm to carry out some service, like provide digital skills trainings, for example. So in order to hire that organization, we need to go through an entire process. First of all, you float the request for proposal, but before that, that's like much later. Before all of that, we have to kind of seek approval from various people in our organization, starting with the project manager, And then next we go on to, the unit head of the unit in which the project is based. And then you go on to, the procurement officer, then you have the admin and finance officer, then it goes on to the assistant resident representative. So, you have these various levels of people who this entire case that you've prepared needs to go to. They'll review it, they'll approve it, or they won't. If they don't approve it, they might have some comments. You have to address those comments, and then you kind of have to re-notify them. Then they'll review it again. So you can imagine how long it takes. And we have like an online system where all of this happens. But because everyone has so much work all the time, I mean, this is not the only thing that one has to do, right? One probably has so many cases to review. So you can imagine how many days each person takes to review that and approve that. So it can take even 2 to 3 months, sometimes even more than that, to even get out a request for proposal online. And then once you get that request for RFP out, then you have to wait for maybe 15-20 days until you actually receive proposals from the organizations. Then you review them, and you have to kind of score them, etc. And then finally, then you sign the contract and take them on board. So this is just one of the really basic examples of how bureaucratic it can be, and how frustrating it can be sometimes. Yeah,
that makes sense, especially just like in terms of the inability to have this immediate element to the process, and the fact that it can be so lengthy when maybe you would like and think it's necessary for it to start and be much of a faster process. That makes a lot of sense.
absolutely.
Then in terms of innovation, I think yeah, your work is so interesting, and I think it would be interesting to so many people because it is so cross-sectoral. And I'm wondering, when you mention these programs about education and sort of work empowerment, is there a gendered lens to those? Are you specifically targeting, say, just female youth, etc.? Because there's a very large Muslim population in Pakistan, and I think that youth programming probably needs to take a gendered lens to fit into sort of the social expectations. So I'm wondering if you could sort of address that, and then also the question about innovation in these youth programs, and who and what are you turning towards to think about how you can innovate and improve things?
Okay, yeah. Okay. So about your first question regarding having a gender lens, absolutely. Not just in the Youth Empowerment Program, but across all UNDP projects, we always make sure that we have a gender lens, and take care of that, and where possible and where appropriate, we definitely apply a gender lens. With regards to the Youth Empowerment Program in particular, we definitely do have a gender lens, and because generally in the world, and in Pakistan in particular, gender inequality is really, really high over here. And women over here, especially young women, are quite marginalized and disadvantaged compared to their male counterparts. So and we kind of take that into consideration when we come up with different initiatives within our entire project. So for example, we if we're doing digital skills trainings, some of our trainings are particularly for women who and over here in Pakistan, a lot of women are kind of not allowed to go out of their houses, especially from rural areas. So we try and take that into consideration. Given your social norms, we try and provide trainings to them in such a way that they can do them from the comfort of their homes, and they can we can kind of equip them with skills that allow them to work from their homes. I mean, some would say that that's not ideal. We'd want women to kind of go out of their houses and work, but like everyone should. But you have some restrictions, and you have some social norms that you need to take into consideration, when you're living in such a place. So we definitely do that, and that's one example of the ways that we have a gender lens. On your other question regarding innovation, and who we kind of work with. UNDP works with the government of Pakistan to implement a lot of projects, and the reason for that is because I mean, people at UNDP will come and go, but the government is here to stay, and we need to kind of have them on board for all of the projects that we implement, so that we can see some sustainable change rather than just one-off project changes. One example is when the pandemic hit, so UNDP received several requests to kind of deliver digital support, and we developed a digital transformation portfolio, and this was done with the crisis prevention and recovery unit, as well as the governance and development policy teams. And we tested out this new service that offers the service offers for our government partners, and we have an innovation lab that kind of coordinates the portfolio, with a learning lens to test out new digital service offerings, with a special focus on ensuring digital services that are human-centered. So we kind of wanted to come up with different solutions to provide to improve public service delivery, and also in order to equip our public officials with digital skills, because everything went online. So we needed to come up with ways on how to improve public service delivery through through digital means, as well as kind of equip our government partners with a way to kind of equip them with the skills to know how to work online, because most of it is paper based. So yeah, this is one of the
that specific initiative was targeted for sort of equipping government officials themselves with the online sort of skills and tools. So interesting. So your work sort of even reaches beyond just this youth element to also sort of promote governance.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. And I guess sort of building off that, what for you has been one of the projects that you've enjoyed or you felt has had the most impact in a positive way, and why?
Okay, so there are several, but for example, we trained around. We do a lot of trainings, right, on digital skills as well as entrepreneurship. So we trained around 8,000 youth on basic entrepreneurship skills, and from rural areas. These youth were from rural areas, so we trained them on how to set up a business, how to manage your accounts, your financial business, and how to kind of make your micro enterprise sustainable. And we don't just give the training and that's it. We also through our partners, we provide mentoring services as well, provide industry linkages as well, so it helps them connect to the industry, and continue to kind of provide support to them, so that they're good enough to make it sustainable. So we saw great results after that training. We continue to follow up with our trainees for about 6 months or so, or more than that. And we saw some really great results. We had I think around more than 3,000 of those youth who ended up, setting up something or the other. And when I say, setting up enterprise, it doesn't have to be something really fancy. Obviously, it could be something as small as, setting up a food stall. But as long as it, provides them with an income, which was one of the main objectives of the program, we saw some really great results from that, and it was really great to see that the project that we're doing has it's actually bringing about some change, and it has a positive impact at the grassroots level. And like I mentioned about sometimes things getting really bureaucratic, sometimes you might feel like these things can get in the way of you trying to bring about some real change. So I think it's really important to keep a check on that and to not let that happen, and to continue to, make sure that you're actually impacting people's lives. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point, especially because I do think whether it's the UN or other sort of NGOs or working in other foundations that do similar type of work, or even working in your own government, there is definitely this tension between the sort of bureaucracy that the institution requires and then your reason for being in that institution in the first place, which is wanting to see and to promote positive change and to see it happen. And those things, there's sort of a tension between the two, I think, in some ways. And I think also people can become disillusioned by the bureaucracy of the institution or of it in that nature. And as a result, maybe become more distanced from the actual impact. And I think what's so amazing about your work is the fact that sort of like empowerment is very broad, right? And sort of like these skills that you're equipping them with are purposefully, I'm assuming, very multidisciplinary in the sense that they can then use them across different aspects of their lives to improve their quality of life, both from the sense of sort of financial improvement and potential sort of means of mobility, but also I'm assuming there's probably work about interpersonal skills, etc., that sort of have this financial element to them, but also this very much relational sort of like self-efficacy side as well, which I think is really, really beautiful. So that's really, really wonderful.
Absolutely. Yeah, we also actually, so like I mentioned, our youth empowerment program consists of three main pillars. One is in constructive engagement, one is education, and one is economic empowerment. So we kind of bring all of them together and have various initiatives for each pillar. Some work across each other, some are for one particular pillar, but we do try and equip the youth with not only these digital skills and skills that help them have productive employment, but also equip them with critical life skills, like you mentioned, interpersonal skills, communication skills, and digital literacy as well, not only in terms of maybe coding skills, but actually knowing how to behave online, what to say online, what to not say online, these social media skills. So all of these things kind of come together, and we aim to kind of empower the youth, not just economically, but otherwise as well.
Especially the digital side of things is very important and very relevant for everyone, but especially youth. Okay, I'm going to ask you maybe one or two more questions, if that's all right. So this one's a bit more broad, but I'm just going to go for it. So obviously part of your work relates to poverty alleviation and poverty eradication, and that's a very central focus of the UNDP's work across the world. And I'm wondering, in the context of Pakistan, what do you believe are some of the biggest roadblocks to achieving this large-scale poverty alleviation and social mobility across the country?
Okay. Okay. So I mean, we all know there's
right?
Yeah, there are so many factors. But perhaps I quickly point out a few. So one is inequality. So poverty, inequality, and economic growth, they're also interconnected. And the well-being of the lowest segment of the population globally, as well as in Pakistan, it happens to be strongly linked to the wealth concentrated in the uppermost segment of the society, because of limited resources, lack of access to resources, as well as opportunities. So I mean, there's inequality in terms of lack of access to resources, but also besides that, there's inequality that has intangible consequences that can affect social and economic advancement. So, I mean, inequality it's an easy but sometimes misleading term. It used to describe systemic barriers leaving groups of people without a voice or without any representation within their communities. So for a population to escape poverty, I think all of these groups need to be involved in the decision-making process, especially when it comes to having a say in things, that determine your place in society. Some of these may be really obvious, but in other situations, it can be subtle. So you have, gender inequality, you have caste systems, even in today's day and age. You have marginalization based on race, on ethnicities, or tribal affiliations, and they're all economic and social inequalities that mean the same thing, which is that little or no access to these resources that they need to live a productive life. And when you combine these different kinds of inequalities, a marginalized community, they may even become more vulnerable to the cycle of poverty. So that's one. And then also, I think conflict. Conflict is one of the most common forms of driving poverty today. We still have large scale, protracted violence that we've seen in areas like Syria, Ukraine, and Afghanistan, Palestine, so many places, and they kind of grind society to a halt, destroying infrastructure, and then causing people to flee. And these people, they obviously can't take things with them, so they're pushed below the poverty line. And even small bouts of violence can have huge impacts on communities that are already struggling. So for example, if you have farmers who are worried about their crops being stolen, they won't invest in planting. And then women in particular, they also bear the brunt of conflict. So displacement due to conflict is a great cause for poverty as well. And then you have your other factors, like education is a very, very important factor as well. Lack of education, not to say that every person without an education is living in extreme poverty, but most of the extremely poor do not have an education. And then there are a lot of barriers to education. And also one more major factor that I'd just like to leave here is regarding governance and institutions and politics. Sometimes a lack of political will, a lack of institutional reform, poor governance, and a lack of focus on policy reform. So most governments in maybe low or middle socioeconomic status countries, they're so focused on their own political agendas and securing votes, and any measures or reforms that are initiated are either short term or backed by different intentions, or not even backed by data. So I think that also it's a very underrated factor, I think. And I can say that this is definitely true for Pakistan. So I mean, these are just some of the main factors that I could think of that I think are really, really important. And that as sorry, yeah.
Sorry, that was a very big question that I asked you. So yeah, you're considering how little time there is to actually discuss this. I think that your answer covers some of the major facets of exactly what we're talking about. Sorry, I interrupted you, though. You can continue.
No worries. No, that's it. That was it from my end.
Okay. I think the governance point is a really interesting and important one, because I think the sort of, I mean, it's similar. So I'm doing research in Brazil. It's similar here, and it's similar in a lot of ways, even to parts of the United States, in the sense that, policies are not based on sort of science or based on data. They're tied to the sort of political will, or rather the political agenda of the individual, but only at a surface level and not really at an integral, like well thought through and purposely intentioned way to actually have impact at scale.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and just the nature of governance in the sense that you have these cycles of 2 to 4 years means that even very well-designed policies that have taken a lot of time to even be pushed through, essentially, or voted through, then when the election cycle is over, are just dumped after 2 to 4 years, which makes it very difficult to have consistent sort of change and improvement with longevity just based on the nature of the election cycle. So that I completely agree with you that that's a very underrated yet completely impactful and powerful and potentially very negative at times influence on everything.
Absolutely. Yeah. That is something that globally and at the national level as well, we really need to work on. And I hope that organizations like UNDP who work with the government can actually make some change in that area as well.
Yeah. Okay, so the last question for our conversation today is sort of one that I think people tend to ask in these sorts of conversations because I think they're very helpful. So the question is, what advice do you wish you had been given while at Cambridge as you considered your future career in international development work? What do you wish you had known? Or what would you tell yourself, being where you are now, about this sort of work, or how to get to where you are now?
Okay. I'm not too sure how to answer that question because each individual goes through a different process and kind of learns on the way. So no matter how much one might advise you, some things, obviously some kind of advice is always useful, but some things you always just have to experience yourself and learn along the way in order to figure out what you want to do, where you want to work, etc. But I definitely think at that stage, if somebody had kind of told me about getting some international experience, which I didn't do. For example, if I had after I completed my MPhil, if I had stayed in the UK to gain some experience, maybe through an internship at an NGO or think tank, or I think that would have been really useful. It gives you a very different perspective. It would have been really helpful with personal as well as professional growth. I do understand that obviously everyone has different circumstances. Some might not be able to actually do that. But if one has the chance, I think that would be a great experience. Or maybe, there's these international fellowships as well, like the Overseas Development Institute fellowship scheme that can help you get some experience in another country. I think it really opens your mind, helps you, like I said, with your personal and professional growth, some field work, and it can also, open up avenues for, future career opportunities as well. So that's just one thing that I often think about. But other than that, some just general advice that would have been useful at that point in terms of, applying to, I think, you at that stage you need to apply everywhere when you're looking to kind of find a job in the international development sector. I think one needs to just apply everywhere, talk to different kinds of people, talk to alumni, talk to your fellow students, talk to your lecturers, learn about the different kinds of jobs and roles available, and then you might learn about new opportunities that you might not find otherwise. So once one graduates, I think the next goal should be to kind of get your foot in the door, apply to all sorts of jobs in the development sector, even if they may not be your first choice. There are some people who kind of know what exactly they want to do once they graduate, what particular field or subfield they want to go into. But there are a lot of people like me, I would say, who didn't know exactly what sector, what field they would like to go into, which I think is completely okay. But just talking to different people, learning about the different sectors that you can go into, that can really help kind of help you make your decision. And then, like I said, just continue to apply to different places, gain some experience in different areas, and then that kind of, slowly helps you understand what particular areas you would like to further focus on and further pursue. So yeah, and also networking is something that I don't think I did enough or at all. Yeah, and I think, that was in 2018. I mean, it doesn't seem very long ago, but at the same time, in this day and age, I think in 2018, like for example, LinkedIn now, I think is much more, used as compared to 2018, if I'm not wrong. So using LinkedIn, just talking to lots of people, your friends of friends, alumni, and that, I mean, you get connected to people, you learn from them, you get to know of opportunities. I think that's really important. And also, lastly, knowing how to kind of apply to places. So, tailoring your CV, your cover letter, to the particular job that you're applying to, and following up with potential employers, or places that you apply to. So these are some really quick tips that maybe if I had them, things might have been different, or they would have been really useful in my in my entire process, applying for jobs. Yeah.
Well, Zara, thank you so much for taking the time to talk today. I really appreciate it. And yeah, thank you for sharing all of your thoughts and experiences. And I'm sure that many people will learn from what you had to say.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed speaking to you and sharing my thoughts on these things, and I really hope that it may benefit someone or the other. Thank you so
Definitely.
much.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.